A warm welcome to another special edition of the Magpie Circle, and we're breaking new ground today because we're going to be interviewing a former Magpie while they are in quarantine in Australia. So Paul Smalley, 144 appearances for Notts in the 80s. You spanned during your time and career with the club some of the true greats: Jimmy Sirrel, Howard Wilkinson, John Barnwell, the commencement of the Derek Pavis era. You were in at the dawn of all of that, and I think, as you pointed out to me, worked under a succession of fantastic coaches: Howard, Dick Bate, Mick Walker, Russell Slade when he was cutting his teeth at Notts. Great times, and we're going to delve into those today. So a very warm welcome, Paul. Delighted to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's a privilege to be here, actually, because I've been following your interviews with some real prestigious celebrities and colleagues, former players, and certainly former managers and coaches. So yeah, I'm happy to be involved and to be here with you.
It's great to have you. You know, we'll be delving into the 80s at Meadow Lane. And we'll also be talking more contemporary in some of the globetrotting that you've been up to, because you literally have covered the world. Technical director with the Bangladeshi FA. Home is now in Australia. You spent some time with Mick Waite in New Zealand, I believe, as well. So lots to talk about. But I want to take you back to arguably one of the most successful eras of Notts County back in the 80s. And when we were in the top flight, you were kind of a young schoolboy, weren't you, growing up? So whereabouts was home at that time for you in Nottingham?
Yeah, Paul, I was born and bred in Bramcote. I went to Bramcote Hills Comprehensive School. I was also one of those local players that was born and bred into the era of the production of quality young players that Notts County managed to produce during that time. So, you know, I was a local born and bred player, and was fortunate to access the unstructured academy, the structured youth program at Notts County as an 11, 12-year-old. So wonderful memories, and was involved in a number of experiences with a lot of younger players at that time that went on to have bigger and better careers than myself.
Well, don't downplay it. I mean, you know, 144 appearances for Notts, and you were more or less an ever present for 2 successive seasons. But just talk to me as a young boy then. Your introduction to Notts County, was this a case of training on a Sunday, being a ball boy, and all of those sorts of things in that era?
No, not really, Paul. We the program at Notts was 2 or 3 nights down at the indoor facility behind the back of the ground, as you can remember.
Yeah,
those years ago. So they had all of those younger players that.
So who was in your alumni? Who was with you going through the ranks?
Oh dear, I mean, Simeon Hodson, David Beaver, Mark Jones, Darren Davis, Tony Dawes. There was a plethora of players that were involved in that process, whether it was the local player that was in and around Nottingham that came in during those periods of time, or the holiday periods where Notts had programs where they brought in those players from outside of Nottingham. You know, the Tommy Johnsons, the Mark Drapers, the Dean Yates, the Paul Barnes. You know, the list is endless. And at that time, I think that Notts and Luton under David Fleet were producing the most younger players, and as the information suggests today, times within the first team, Notts were well up there with the success of their youth program, and that was really culminated through the guidance of Mick Walker, who I can't speak highly enough, who again, as you mentioned earlier, really influenced me to move into coaching once my playing days had finished, and that was what I did. You know, he was a wonderful youth coach, and actually some of the successes that he had as producing young players that went on to play first team football, I don't think we really appreciated it.
It was a huge production line, and the reality is, it's in very sharp contrast to the situation at the minute, where very few young players coming through Notts' academy system end up getting a taste of first team action, and then it's up to them. You make your first game, and then that can be a make or break situation, can't it? But in those days, the number of players that physically made first team appearances was colossal, which I'm guessing as a group of young players coming through, that was exactly what you wanted to see, wasn't it? Because I've got a chance here. Yeah.
No, absolutely, Paul. And again, we smile at some of the conditioned, structured approach to youth development as we're talking now. But back in those days, I can remember playing under the auspices of Notts County, the age group team of under 16 in the Leicestershire Senior League, with the likes of David Clark, Mark Draper, Dean Yates, Paul Barnes, where we would get regular, consistent games in a strong division, the senior division, where you'd play against men, and we were developing younger players. And Jimmy always used to come to those games. And as you're playing, you'd always be looking around just to see whether Jimmy was walking into the ground. Where was he? Was he sitting down? And if you didn't see him, Paul, you certainly heard him at some stage. It was a magical time. It really was.
Very interesting. I mean, we all know Jimmy was a complete and utter workaholic, although I guess he didn't see it as work, did he? And interesting, you mentioned there about playing in men's local leagues. I think Forest had exactly that same model at that time with Alan Hill, because there's a big debate in the current era, isn't there, that there's so much age group football, you only play against people in your age group, and can ultimately drift out of pro football having only ever played your age group, 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds, and not actually played men.
That's right, Paul. And from your experience, you're fully aware of that. And certainly we've lost a little bit of a track, I think, of that transition into senior football, where those potentially young players made that big step into senior football. Well, before that happens, how can you develop an environment that allows that transition to happen? And how can you develop that environment where those younger players are ready for first team football? And Notts County at that time, and as you said, you're very right, both Forest, Derby County, Leicester City at that time had their own models and their own mechanisms for doing it. And as I said earlier, Notts County and Luton were at that time producing players that were ready and capable and able to go into senior football for the first team of that club and consistently make appearances. Not we're in for 3 or 4 games and then we need to give this younger player a rest. No, that never happened at Notts. Notts' approach to it was, if that younger player was ready, let's see what he was capable of, how he was performing, put him in, and if he performed well, which a lot of those younger players did, they remained in the first team. That was Jimmy's approach.
Mentioning Jimmy Sirrel, as we're bound to now, I believe he literally turned up at your house, didn't he, to persuade you to sign?
I think he's done that with a lot of players, and I was fortunate that he saw something in me, and I can remember for 3 hours at least, my mother was continually making him cups of tea.
So what age were you at this point? Yeah,
I committed to the club at between 12 and 13, as a lot of those players did, because of the personal touch, Paul. The caring, the sensitive nature to it. You know, to have the manager come into your house and sit down in front of the fire with my mother and father and convince my mother and father that Notts County was the best club to sign because of certain opportunities for younger players. And at that time, certainly there were a lot of players that had the opportunity to go to Forest. And I had the opportunity to go to Forest. But as you know, at that time, Forest were paying huge amounts of money for players. And my father and mother felt that this was a great opportunity for me. And Jimmy convinced me that this was something which we would certainly be thankful of. And the stories and what he was saying and his approach to a young player, which he didn't need to do, Paul. You know, he didn't need to do that, and he did that. So that was for me, or for us, no problem. I signed as a promising player at 12 years of age.
So, when you're signing at 12 years of age, where were Notts? Was that when Jimmy and Howard would have been in their pomp, getting the club into the top flight? Just put into context Notts' status at that time.
Yeah, the Notts' status at that time was the transition, I think, in terms of the stability of remaining in the top flight. But before that, it was the promotion of getting into the top flight, as you know, at that time, the First Division. So it was plotting that mission and then maintaining and creating that stability in the First Division. And certainly that was a period of time for any young player that you think to yourself, this is a fantastic opportunity. And when David Clark, at 17, another local boy, got his debut playing against Aston Villa away, that for me was an indication that the club was really serious about giving opportunities for young players.
As you're graduating through the ranks at Notts, clearly Notts had some, strong characters, Kilclines, Rashid Harkouk, those sorts of players. So where were you? Did you become an apprentice at that point, or were you a little bit off it on a match day? Like I said earlier, would you have been a ball boy? I mean, what was your interaction with the first team at that time?
Well, the interaction and the approach, certainly at that time, was that everybody was integrated in a way. But as a promising young player, you were taught, if that's the right word to use, you were inducted into the apprentice professional mold, where you did everything. And at that time, I can remember myself, Darren Davis and Tony Dawes, we were preparing the training kit, washing the training kit, getting all of the equipment ready, making sure that the university was ready to take training on a day-to-day basis. And I can remember a little bit of a story, and this is before I was an apprentice professional, when Don Masson was still involved. And as you know, Don Masson was such a character, and he wanted everything to be as perfect or close to perfect as possible. And if his kit and his boots weren't there on his peg at the university at a particular time, he wouldn't train. And I can remember this particular time that the minibus wasn't ready to take ourselves down to the university, that we were a little bit late, 5-10 minutes. And as we were walking in, Don was walking out, and my kit's not here, my boots are not here, so I'm not training. It needs to be here on time. Now, that was his attention to detail. And as you know, with everything we've heard and read, that was one of those Don's real personality traits that he had. And a lot of the other players were the same. There was that kind of standard and that kind of environment that was created by Jimmy and Howard, that these players at that time were making sure that everything was in the level of detail necessary for them to perform in the way that they did at that particular time.
Yeah, I mean, part of what the Magpie Circle is all about is shining a light into the nooks and crannies, into the little professional bubble that fans don't normally see. And the stories that you're telling there, many of the lads that we have had on that have gone through different eras like you, the stories that they tell when they are 15, 16, 17, they kind of stay with them for life. We had Greg Tempest on, more contemporary, said the most frightening moment of his entire life was having to clean Martin Allen's room as an apprentice and knocking on the door and waiting for Martin to answer. And he said that's the most frightening thing in his life ever. Mark Draper would say to me, it was terrifying having to take the tea into the first team dressing room because of characters, Rashid Harkouk or whatever. You just wanted to get in there and get out within seconds. We had an hilarious episode with Paul Cox, Paul Sherlock, and Jimmy Walker. You know, and Paul Cox remembers to this day how Paul Hart got him by the throat, pinned him up against the wall, and says, "You better take that earring out." You know, and there are all these sorts of things. It's quite
Absolutely.
a hierarchical system, isn't it? Or certainly was then. And yes, it's character building. I'm guessing it can also be quite terrifying as well as a 15, 16, 17-year-old.
Yeah, of course. And through that period of time, it was a difficult period because, you know, you're a young player and you have to, I suppose, adopt to some of the standards that were set at the time by the club. You were an apprentice professional. You were recognised to have potential, but there was an expectation. And you weren't in that professional arena yet. You had potential, but you understood your place and you were courteous and polite. You had to knock on the door. Always at the university, for Jimmy and Howard's room, you always have to knock on the door. You're always very using your manners all of the time. That's what the expectations were. And of course, we had to clean boots. We had to organise all the equipment. We had to get all of the training gear ready, and we had to wash it at the end of the day and make sure that everything was all spick and span. And Jimmy was the kind of person that would always come and check at the end of the day to make sure you'd cleaned both the university and the ground. You couldn't leave the ground until everything was spick and span. He always used to come in, check the corners, make sure it was clean, there was no dust. And if there was dust, I could always remember him just walking out and turning around in that Scottish accent. You haven't finished yet, boy. So you knew that he'd find some dust in the corner. And these stories, you will never leave me. I think about these as if there was yesterday. And there's many, many more. You know, the Kilclines, the characters, the Harkooks, being a young player, you know, training with the Gordon Mayers, the Paul Hooks of the world. You know, these players that had played in the first team, and you were quickly inducted into training with these kinds of levels of characters. It was just a wonderful experience.
Would I be right in thinking? Not sure it would have been you. So you'd have been playing Midland Intermediate League, wouldn't you? Which would have been kind of the Saturday mornings. Were you playing down Stoke Bardolph at that point, or had Howard moved everything to the university?
We used to sort of chaperone between Grove Farm and the university. The university at the time, before it's all been redeveloped now, was the, I suppose, the Wembley of Notts County's youth programme, because they used to train up there and they used to play all the 18 games, as they called it, you know, the Midland Youth in Youth League, which at that time, and like you said earlier, Paul, we don't have that now. That was a fantastic vehicle to develop as a young player, because you were playing with seasoned professional players that needed match action, some time on the grass. They weren't in the first team. So they used to play in the A team. And as a young player, you were in there learning from these senior players, had played hundreds of first division games, who were playing in that team, just to sharpen their the competition and their match. They needed some time on the grass and some match action. So as a young player, it was a wonderful experience. Something that I think needs to be created today for those up and coming young players, because like you said earlier, it's just age group football. And I'm not so sure that's the reality of the transition into a senior team.
Okay. So you're going through the ranks at Notts County. Howard has left, sadly, and because that precipitated a fall from out of the top flight of English football. But on the very positive side, you get your first team chance. Yeah. So who would have been in charge? Who gave you your first team chance? Because it would have been Swansea, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, Jimmy was there. I'm not sure whether it was Larry Lloyd or Richie Barker. Maybe not. I think Jimmy was given a little bit of time on his own before he brought anybody else in. So Jimmy thought that the time was right to give me my debut, and again, to come up against a legend like Leighton James, who was a class act. Somebody that had played internationals and was a legend in that part of the world, to come to a young up-and-coming player playing in the right-back position. But no, I went through the experience, and for me, it was a good leap of confidence for me to go on and then certainly try and establish myself on a consistent basis.
Were you always a right-back?
I think predominantly of my games, certainly in the senior team, played the vast majority as a fullback. I did at times play as a centre back in the days where we played Spurs in the FA Cup, and we had the youngest back four. At the time, I was in that, lucky enough to be in that team.
But you got a draw, didn't you? Drew 1-1.
Yeah, that's right. We did, and unfortunately, I had to go to White Hart Lane, where obviously the class that they had at that time. But again, when you're playing against top clubs and top players, you only probably get the one opportunity. We were very unlucky at that time. We should have beat them. It was a bit of a frosty pitch, but you were playing against the Hoddles of the world, and the Mark Falcos, the Clive Allens. So again, a super experience. But Jimmy was never fazed by giving young players, the chance. I can remember Wayne Fairclough, Dean Yates, myself, Darren Davis. I mean, it was just great. And I think a lot of the public at that time really, really acknowledged and understood and certainly appreciated that younger players were given the opportunity. And, there was, as a large proportion of younger players that went on and made their debut, and then went on from Notts and had illustrious careers. So, it was a wonderful time.
If my memory serves me correctly, after Richie, Jimmy kind of came back, didn't he? Hand on the tiller. I think Dick Bate might have been around at this point as well. And effectively, you, as I can understand this, you were an ever present in Jimmy's final season at Meadow Lane before the big takeover took place with Jack Dunnett selling on to Derek Pavis. And in that season, it would have been the third tier. You did very well. You finished 7th or 8th. And like you say, when you look at those players, I mean, the average age of that group of players, must have been 21, 22.
Oh, that's right, Paul. And again, there was, I think, the clear, I suppose, agreement or the clear understanding that there wasn't the ability at that time to invest heavily into the transfer market. So Notts at that time had an array of players, array of younger players, certainly that were capable and able to play senior football, and those younger players actually went on when the takeover happened with Derek Pavis, with John Barnwell coming in, where there was some investment and there were sort of players that came in to add value with all of the younger players. And at that time, we were a little bit fearful of what to expect. The likes of Gary Birtles, Gary Mills, Jeff Pike, Andy Gray,
yes,
coming into the club, that were attracted by a vision, and certainly attracted by increased resources to come in, and the younger players, including myself, were sort of asking a number of questions. Is this the time to move on? Were we valued? Shall we remain? And again, we were given the opportunity. So it was a real mingle, and unfortunately, we missed out in the playoffs at that time. A real unfortunate. We were second in the league all the way going, and then we faltered, I think, with a couple of games. So yeah, the youngsters still prevailed. We still played, and again, it was a good education for me to play with the likes of Jeff Pike, who came from West Ham. So yeah, it was a good time.
So what was it like then? I mean, because certainly for those 2 seasons, you just played, from what I can see, every game. So local boy made good. Week in, week out, you are the established first choice right back for your local hometown club. Life must be good.
Yeah, I think life was very good. Life was where I wanted it to be. Certainly, it established myself. Certainly had a wonderful preparation to then get into that stage. Lots of memories, and I think through that period, a lot of good experience that allowed me now to be ready for that, to really establish on a consistent basis. It's fair to say that there was a lot of good, knowledgeable coaches that again were certainly ahead of the times. When John Bong was there, he brought in Paul Hart, who was ahead of his time, who again was connected to Dick Bates, the era of Dick and the era of Howard. That kind of ilk, that kind of intellect as coaches. Mick Walker was still there behind the scenes as well, so that provided a real platform. So it was a really good opportunity to get into the team, and I think John Barnwell at that time brought in Alan Hill behind the scenes to get into the recruitment and the scouting. And Alan also used to come down to training and give his view and opinions. And as a player, establishing myself, some of his feedback and some of his comments to me was invaluable. So it was a good time. And also, I played a lot of games with Gary Mills, proven obviously over the road, over the Trent there at the Forest, and obviously Gary Birtles as well. So it was a really, really good time. It was unfortunate that we didn't probably achieve what essentially the potential we had. Maybe given a little bit more time, because I know, as you know, Derek was very insistent of success. Maybe a little bit more time, things might be different. But we're certainly the time that John Bong was there, we also created a real brand of football, as you know.
You rattled up a lot of games. What do you remember of any particular individual games? Were there any particularly difficult left wingers that you were coming up against?
I think every team that I played against had the real challenges, and certainly you have to solve the problems. I think, as my memory serves me right, during the time, there was a certain Chris Waddle we've alluded to during the 2 cup games. Playing against Tottenham. International Chris Waddle. That was a time where you come up against real class of a player that you really didn't really know what he was going to do. It was a real maestro, a solo, somebody who, give him the ball, could do whatever you wanted. And to have somebody like Glenn Hoddle in midfield, who's be able to supply the balls to him, you can imagine it was a difficult scenario, but I'm pretty resourceful, so I came up with the challenge. But certainly that would stick out above a lot of the other challenges that I had during that period of time.
Now in your Notts career, I clocked it as 144 appearances. Unfortunately, in the goals column, it was 0. I mean, did you ever get close?
Certainly, as we have now, it's the assists. Certainly, there was a lot of assists. And you need to get a column for assist, Paul.
The stats didn't do them in them days.
No, but I certainly didn't. I suppose at the time I got close, was in certain situations, but my assist certainly from the right flank created a lot of opportunities for others. So whilst I'm a little bit embarrassed by it, it's one of those things. But certainly playing in those games and contributing to other people's successes in terms of scoring goals was really what I'm quite happy about.
It's nothing to be embarrassed about at all, Paul. We've had Bob Worthington on, who made 232 appearances for Notts from left back. He scored one goal, and he celebrated because the fans on the county roadside have been giving him a bit of jip. He celebrated by dropping his shorts to him. So you're in good company with fullbacks not being
absolutely. And I think, Paul, I listened to Batesy. You had Brian on, and Brian's obviously in a similar mould as hell. A wonderful career he had. So he didn't get on the score sheet too many times as well, but certainly an ambassador of the club in many ways, and contributed a lot to a further generation of younger players. So I listened to that very intently. Yeah.
Did you notice a change in culture at the club from kind of being in Jimmy's last season playing and then Derek coming in? You've mentioned there was more money, but was there a big sea change in approach?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's fair to say. I think a lot of people observe that. I think when Jimmy was decided it was time to sort of move on, you lost a little bit of the that kind of philosophy and culture, and things were being moved around a lot in terms of training grounds and connections with certain people. So yeah, I think there were some changes, and of course, as you know, Derek's intent to bring success and investment, and then obviously after the John Barnwell era, I left just before there was the obviously the Warnock, when Neil came in, and obviously then he created a different culture with a different array of players. And had significant success. So it was a little bit of a sad time, because you saw that culture sort of dwindling away a little bit that had been built up ever since the Jimmy and Howard sort of situation.
Yeah, it's always very difficult. I suppose you call it change management in the modern era, don't you? When dynasties come to an end, because that's kind of what it was. And there's a wonderful story that the club secretary, Tony Cuthbert, told me, which kind of encapsulated it. When Derek bought the club from Jack, who had, of course, been an institution in his own right. And I can understand where Derek comes from. He wanted to make a clean break. And he basically just called Jimmy and said, that's it. It's over. You're not part of my regime moving forward. Off you go. Just cut it at that. And then, so fast forward 2 or 3 months, and Tony tells the wonderful story, having been recruited by Derek, that on a Thursday afternoon, regular as clockwork at 2 o'clock or whatever time it was, in would come Jimmy Sirrel. And he would come to reception, afternoon, walk straight through, and although people didn't necessarily know this, he went into the dressing room, and he'd have a bath, because that's kind of what he had done for like 30 years, and no one at the club dared say anything. And Tony said, for like, it went on for 6 months. He said, I daren't say anything to him. because the guy's a legend. And, you know, I didn't know what he was doing. You know, I think someone had to follow him one day to find out what was going on. And in his own way, Jimmy had become, you know, that was just part of his entire fabric and life. You know, he had a bath and he just carried on and no one dare say anything. It's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah, many times when we're cleaning the changing rooms during that sort of apprentice professional stage of our career, my career, you know, Jimmy was always the last one to leave the ground. He was always in the bath, the communal bath as it was in those days, always in there floating around. And as you know, he always used to go on that run down the Trent, up and back, and then come back. He'd feel refreshed and he'd go in the bath, and sometimes he'd fall asleep in the bath. And you always sort of undertaking your cleaning, and you're a little bit worried that, you know, is he okay? And he's floating in the bath. And like you said, this kind of culture was established for years and years and years. And for Jimmy, I would imagine it was a sad time where, you know, Derek has said, look, you know, you're not involved in my time now, and, you know, I'm looking to change things. You know, like you said, things come to an end, but you know, as a player that came through that period of time, you could see the culture really shifting and changing to a different time, and a time that also was proven to be successful for sure.
Your own time came to an end, as you've mentioned earlier, and looking at the stats, you kind of played every league game under John Barnwell's first season, got into the playoffs, played Walsall, but I noticed you didn't play in those 2 playoff games, did you? Is there much of a story or not behind that?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a story, Paul. It was I was offered a new contract, and at that time felt that I deserved a little bit more. And I turned down the contract and was subsequently left out. Obviously, Derek was again in charge, and obviously I didn't play. So that was an unfortunate period of time. And then I think there was the pre-season. I came back for pre-season, and then subsequently they sold me to Scunthorpe United, where I left the club, which was a real sad time at that moment. So yeah, it was. I'll always remember the time where the question was asked, well, excuse me, boss, why aren't I playing now? I don't need to give you an answer. You know, it was one of those kinds of things, quite a short, flippant, and I guess, you know, the prerogative of John Barnwell, who, you know, I had a very, very good relationship anyway. So, you know, that's football, and sometimes they hold the upper hand. At the time, you think it's very unfair, but again, you know, I chose not to sign a new contract with the club, and was subsequently then moved out of the club in a way where, you know, I went and had another wonderful experience at Scunthorpe United. So,
yeah, I say to a lot of people, football is quite a brutal business. There are clearly, certainly in the modern era, fantastic rewards and riches. But moving and changing clubs is quite a brutal business, isn't it? You know, I remember at my time in the early days at Leicester, quite literally players would be told, "That's it, you're off," and you get a bin liner. You get a bin liner, and then basically whatever was in your locker or your bits, you just get the stuff, put it in the bin liner. Wilco's bin liner, off you went. That was it. That was the end. That was the end. However long you've been there, 6 months, 8 years, and of course, with your perspective, you've been associated with that club since you were 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah, as a local homegrown player, and I was proud to be involved in the club and still have contact with a number of different people who had really had an impact on my life, not only while I was playing, but also when I moved into different experiences coaching around the world. So, you know, that was football. And as we know, Paul, you know, there are successes there are rewards, but essentially, you know, there is a thin line. So people react in a way that they have to make those kinds of decisions, and they make those decisions, and in some ways it is brutal. It is disappointing, but you know, again, those decisions have to be made, and we all have to understand that. And everybody is fighting for the next game, to win the next game, to get those points, to get promoted, to stay away from relegation. You know, there's that continual notion of making sure that there is that survival, and you know, we see it now. You know, clubs are increasingly under pressure. So, and the COVID-19 situation, pandemic around the world, has had a real impact on those resources, Paul.
It's fair to say your time at Notts left an indelible impression upon you. And you kind of just preempted my next question there. Do you keep, because clearly you are a global traveller now, do you keep in touch with some of those old teammates and some of your old coaches?
Absolutely. You know, we grew up together. We were young players together. We shared a lot of laughs, a lot of disappointments. Yes, I do keep in touch. But the coaches during that period that had left a real impact in my life, that then you could draw off later when my career came to an end, were vast, you know, and not seem to collect the quality of those coaches. You know, obviously the Howard, the Mick Walkers, the Larry Lloyds, Richie Barkers, the Dick Bates, you know, the Russell Slades, you know, even the support staff, you know, and the John Ramshaws, the Pete Fords, you know, the Brian Bates of the world. These people have left a real indelible connection with me, that have helped me move into a sort of a coaching development career that's allowed me to travel the world, and I always keep in touch with them. And Mick Walker is still alive and kicking in Harrogate, and I tend to, when I owe him a phone call, but you know, we still remember the times. We still remember the times, Paul, where we have a chuckle and a laugh at things that he did, that I did, that Jimmy did, that Howard did, and yeah, wonderful.
You actually ended up moving in at the technical department at the FA with Howard, didn't you?
Yeah, and you know, I had a little bit of time towards my end of my career when Howard was at Leeds. He took me into Leeds, and I played a few reserve team games, and obviously wasn't up to the level of quality that Harold required as part of his squad, because he went on, obviously won the whole first division. Yeah, so again, mixing with the kind of level of quality of the players that Howard was working with was a real eye opener, and one which was a wonderful experience. But yeah, when Howard had sort of, I think, come to the end of the Leeds segment of his career, he was enticed to go into the FA, and radically structured the FA and the English game in a way that allowed England to be looked upon as one of those, you know, footballing greats. You know, it's unfortunate that we haven't won the World Cup yet, but certainly during Howard's time as the technical director, he was shaping everything, shaping the game to put all of those pillars and foundations in place that really allowed the game to move forward with some form of progress and some real development ethos. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that technical department that got into, which was one of my first tasks, the research. You know, Paul, go out and find out what the rest of the world is doing, because we need the research, so we can look at the research, and the FA then can compare what we can do in line with some of the best practice around the world. And that was Howard's approach. You know, he was very analytical. very radical with his analysis of before he decided on what he wanted to do, he wanted to know what everybody else was doing and what the world was doing in a lot of the other confederations around the world.
Was that in a way a precursor to an international coaching career for you?
I think it set the foundations. I mean, I achieved my coaching qualifications at a very young age, and really, Paul, at that time, I thought I was a good coach until I joined the FA, where it was a new world. And at that time, when he was at Notts County, I've said this right at the beginning, he was ahead of his time, at least 10 years. Well, when he was at the FA, again, he was ahead of his time another 10 years. He was so strategic, visionary. He put things in place that you never really thought about, and you never considered to be of any real impact on what was necessary to develop the game in England. But he was very knowledgeable. He brought the schools together. He talked about the tiers of development, where the best players couldn't continue to play all those games for schools and clubs. He came up with the vision of creating that clubs had the opportunity of academies rather than having the national school, which was established at Lithershall. He wanted to give the opportunity to clubs throughout England to say, you now can develop your own players. And I always remember the story that Howard had shared about his time, obviously when he came into Leeds. He created the first academy at Leeds when he was there. He wanted to have a mandate for football at the club. And then when he came into the FA, he created a mandate for football in England. And, I was fortunate to be part of that for about 4 years before it was a time to move into a sphere now and to have a greater responsibility, where I took what I'd learned into New Zealand. I went to New Zealand as technical director and created, I guess, some of the foundations that Howard created 4 or 5 years previous.
And you would have bumped into there, of course, Mick Waite, one of your old Notts teammates. Small world.
Tipper. Yeah, Tipper. What another? And I think Brian Bates alluded to this. Look at your local talent. Well, Mick Waite was working for Rolls-Royce. He was an engineer. He was a mechanical engineer. He was a very, he was one of those specific, very, very attuned craftsmen working for Rolls-Royce. He gave up all of that, signed professionally with Notts County. Well, what a
then it was a guest.
Yes, I mean, wonderful, wonderful. And Mark Robinson was the same. That was the same era, as you can remember. But Mick came in and did very well with his career at Notts. A very lethal partnership with Ian McParland, Charlie, and certainly when I went to New Zealand, Mick was national coach. He took New Zealand from. They beat Australia and qualified for the Confederations Cup. I mean, just a wonderful experience for New Zealand players. Nobody even knew where New Zealand was, let alone that they're actually a force in international football. They beat Australia, went to the Confederations Cup, playing against France in France.
That's right.
It just fantastic. Really was.
You're with Bangladesh now, yeah? So what's your role there? How did all that come about?
A very interesting question. I'd sort of tiptoed around a lot of different places, wonderful experiences, connections with different people as we do, Paul. Even during that time, we always remember the memories of Notts County. As we said earlier, they'll never leave us. This was a recommendation through FIFA. Probably people just recognise Bangladesh for cricket. So far from the truth. densely populated country, approaching over 200 million people, hugely passionate about sport. So recommendation, go in there, structure the country. What do we need to do with regard to the development of football? I spent just over 3 years there, and then had a short period of time as national coach and head of player development at the Brunei Football Federation before COVID struck, and I had to return to Australia because it was very much quite radical in Brunei at the time, because they was worried about the infection and viruses. So I returned to Australia, and then the Federation of Bangladesh asked me to come back for a second term. So I decided it was necessary to come back because there was some unfinished business. So yeah, I'm back now for a second stint, really, and enjoying the experience. Asia is a different experience outside of Europe, of course, and just enjoying it immensely, and traveling a great deal through my role as technical director. We're improving our FIFA rankings all of the time, which is good. Developments of the younger age groups, working very well. So yeah, all of those, I suppose, experiences that I learned from Howard at the time, during his time, my time with him at the FA, and yes, always be thankful of that.
Brunei, I guess we all think, the Sultan of Brunei, one of the world's richest men. We had Mark Stallard on. Knox actually went on a tour that ended up in Brunei for about 7 days. And Mark tells the funny story. All the lads thought, we're playing the Brunei team, and we'll all get a complimentary Rolex when we walk out, and all the rest of it. Of course, they got a pennant. But anyway, it's a good story. Are you appointed by the Sultan? Did you meet the Sultan, or is it all perhaps we have a little bit of a rose-tinted view of it?
You're not far away, really, Paul. Actually, the president was the brother of the king.
Okay.
Yes. So, and actually, he was the president of the Olympic Foundation of Asia, and also he was the senior vice president in AFC. So, he appointed myself, and again had plans for a real modification, if you wish, for the plans for football in Brunei to develop, because it's a very affluent country, and you can understand that. Very much managed and supported very well by the royal family. A beautiful country, very idyllic, but really didn't have the necessary structures and systems in place for the game to develop. Lots of potential, but certainly didn't have those systems and structures, didn't have the right people to allow the game to develop and progress. So, I was appointed, and unfortunately, after about 3 or 4 months, the president wasn't re-elected. There was a different president come in, and then we had COVID, so it was really time for me to leave, I think, and I left, knowing on that people were returning to countries, because there was the insistence of the borders in Australia closing and all kinds of different rumours about what was going to happen. And so, I returned to Australia, and then I was through FIFA again, but the president of the Bangladesh Football Federation was very insistent that he wanted me to come back. So, I agreed, and I still keep in touch with His Royal Highness in Brunei, just through regular contacts, because it was a vision that he sold me, something that didn't materialise. But as again, it's another wonderful experience. But certainly at the moment in time, looking forward to trying my best to push Bangladesh further forward in what we can do with football.
And just so people understand, because we started off the show by explaining that you are quarantining in Australia.
Yep.
Australia is now your home, where your family is, and you're having to do quarantine because you're coming back from Bangladesh, yeah?
Yeah, what's I suppose overcautious, all depends what political view you have for, but certainly Australia have decided on a very cautious approach. Yeah, every returning citizen or permanent resident has to quarantine for 2 weeks, mandatory. So when you arrive at the borders, you are brought off the plane by the police and see you in 2 weeks' time. And during the period of time, you have a couple of COVID tests, which I've had. Fortunately, I'm negative, and tomorrow I'm allowed to leave. So I'll be able to, I'll be able to just reconnect with my family. And looking forward immensely to that, where I've got a short break. And then here in Australia, you've got to also apply to get the permission to leave again.
Right. Yeah.
So it's very, very, very structured here, very, very detailed, and they've contained COVID extremely well. But unfortunately, I've got to follow the regulations. So it's been a good time to engage and continue the work via Zoom, which we've all got to be a little bit flexible now, as you know, virtually and digitally. So yeah. But I'm pleased that tomorrow I'm free.
What is it actually like? I mean, are you stuck in a hotel room for 2 weeks? Can you wander down the landing? I mean, what physically is it like?
No, you can't wander anywhere. You can only wander to one end of your room and back. Fortunately, I've got a balcony. But if you go on the balcony, there are some strict regulations. You've got to wear a mask. You've got to be in a certain part of the balcony. So yeah, it's quite radical. It's quite what would you say? It's very cautious. I'm not allowed out of the room. Fortunately, I've got a spinning bike. I got that delivered, so I've been able to have a little bit of a routine of work and exercise, and obviously shed a few pounds because you're not able to eat what you want. You can only take on what they provide. So yeah, it's been difficult, but we all have to deal with the situation at the moment in time, Paul.
So you have literally been in a hotel room and not set foot outside for 13 days.
Yeah, it sounds difficult to understand, but yeah, that's correct. That has been the regulation in Australia ever since March of 2020. They quickly made that decision. Returners, citizens, you're in quarantine for 2 weeks. So you've got the A League here, where they're international players that go overseas. When they come back, they've got the quarantine. AFC Cup games, when they've gone outside of Australia, when they come back, they've got the quarantine. There's no dispensation for anybody. We just had the news today about the Tokyo Olympics. All of the athletes going over to Tokyo, when they come back, they've got 2 weeks of quarantine to look forward to. So yeah, it's difficult. So if I come back after I go back again, there's a little bit of talk, but I can't see much change. So I'll have to do the 2 weeks again. But me and you, Paul, we're mentally tough. So we've got to deal with these kinds of things.
I hadn't realised it was quite that
radical
and enforced. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens is your food kind of like just left outside the door. You get a knock on the door like a prison cell.
Correct. You get a knock on the door. Everything is there for you. You bring it inside. You're not able to walk outside. When you go to the door, you've got to wear a mask. You eat your food. You have to ask for clean linen, for towels, anything you need. They're pretty amenable, but you're not able to leave the room for those those 14 days. And quite honestly, I was thinking while I'm talking to you that the experiences driving the minibus with all of the kit in the back and the balls, and trying to find the balls when Rashid Harkoop was kicking them all over the place. And incidentally, I still keep in touch with him, has kept me in good stead to be quite a hardened, quite stubborn character, to be honest.
Yeah, Rashid's a friend of our show. We're going to get him on. As you know,
get him on,
straightforward in Rashid's life, but we will get him on. He is clearly as much a character today as he always was.
Absolutely, and out of that era, you know, there was a lot of characters, people that have got on to be very successful coaches. You know, Ian McParland, Mick Leonard have gone on to be successful coaches. Nigel Worthington, successful, and you know, it's unfortunate that Rashid had not put that intellect, knowledge, wisdom. He was extremely complex character, but one that you would listen to and understand. You know, he was such a wonderful person. Angry at times, but you know, we've all got our own indiscrepancies. So yeah, lots of characters during that period.
Same question that I asked to Mick Waite, given that you and he could quite literally not have moved further away from England than where you guys are. I mean, do you miss Nottingham?
Of course, I wouldn't be telling you the truth if I said no, I don't miss it. Of course I do. My parents are still alive. My brother is up in London. My parents live in Woollerton. I miss some of the, you know, those simple things in Nottingham. I do. But you know, life takes us to different places, Paul, around the world, and allow us to grow and develop. And I've been fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to do that. And what I said to my daughters is it's important that you seize these opportunities to go and really expand yourself and grow. So, you know, I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I hope it's not going to end. You know, I've still got a little bit of life left in me, so I want to try and look at another challenge once I finish this project in Bangladesh.
Yeah, I mean, I love to travel, and I'm fortunate with my business to, you know, I've not been to Australia or New Zealand, but I've been to most other places, and so I love to travel. But I am a home bird. You know, I'm a Nottingham boy, born and bred. You know, and I could never imagine myself not being in this city. And I guess one of the single biggest draws of that, although I've worked in pro football for a long time, you know, remains Notts County. You know, it's a constant in your life from when you're 5 years old and your dad takes you, you know, because what do you do at 5 that you do when you're, as I am now, 57? It's not too many things, is it? It's not. Well, what do you do? You know, you eat and you breathe and all the rest of it. But what do you do that you used to do when you were 5? Not many. And going to football is one of them. Going to football is one of them.
You're right, because my early experiences was standing on a stool during the European Cup days at Nottingham Forest with my father.
Oh, you've done so well. We've been going about an hour and 20 minutes, and you've blotted the whole copybook there. You're a closet Forest fan. Oh, terrible. Terrible.
My father was, and I used to go and experience it, and then you sort of develop as a young player, and you then get picked up by a club from over the road, you know, the opposite side of the Trent. You know, you've got this stigma of Nottingham Forest, and then you get picked up with Notts County with this effervescent character of Jimmy Sirrel. Well, you know, it's the rest is history. You know, just a wonderful period of football at that time. You know, where Nottingham Forest, with the players that they had, dominated European football, both domestically and internationally. And then you had a club that was in the shadows of Nottingham Forest that was being moulded and created by Jimmy. And that's a story, and you've written about that, Paul, spoke about it, and a lot of people have shared their memories of their time during this era as well. And, you know, as we all say, you know, we still think about these things as if they were yesterday.
And you're quite right. You know, we were both very fortunate to be involved and to be in and around, be it as a player, a fan, or growing up in an era where football in Nottingham, it's probably never been as good, given what Brian Clough was achieving at Forest, given Notts being in the top flight, and while Howard was there competing successfully, i.e. not too threatened by relegation. And I've always said, if Howard had been at Notts for 5 years or 10 years, like Graham Taylor was at Watford, because he was building his dynasty, I'm convinced Notts would have stayed in the top flight every year that Howard Wilkinson was there, because he was a winner. He was a winner.
Yeah, and you're quite right, Paul. Sorry to interject, but you're quite right. And you would also say that potentially qualified for Europe in those during that particular time, and it's unfortunate that the time of Howard and Jimmy didn't continue, because I believe that there was still unfinished business. Yep. And as soon as that partnership had been severed, then it sort of mumbled along. It dwindled away. There wasn't the same impetus, the same focus as there was when Jimmy and Howard were together.
I mean, wonderful stories that Howard tells when Jimmy first approached him, and he said, you know, Howard says, I don't want to put the cones out. Jimmy says, they didn't run for me, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. You will make them do that, you know. And that's exactly what happened. And Jimmy kind of realised he'd reached the limit of what he could achieve at Notts, and he couldn't quite get them into the top flight. It's great vision by Jimmy. Great vision by Jimmy.
Yes, but even with that, Paul, and you're right, you know, you brought in somebody that was ahead of his times, a strategist, a visionary, somebody that would, you know, leave any stone unturned in Howard. Jimmy still was, I think, at that time, probably one of the best coaches of players that would certainly sit alongside a lot of people that I've had the privilege to come into contact with. You know, he'd come up at the end of a second session when we were young players, come up to the at the back of the Meadow Lane there when it was the five-a-side court. He'd come up and he'd take the session, and some of the things that he would do with us, you see today with some of the top coaches that would be doing. And he would be studious, he would be leading all of the practices. He was a teacher, and you know, with him and Mick Walker at that time, with some of the things that they were doing with the younger players, caring about the younger players, wanted them to go on and be better and represent the club in the first team. You know, there was that real connection. You know, everybody that you speak to in the time that I was there actually loved the experience. And the numbers of players are there to be seen that went on, made senior debuts, and a lot of them actually had better careers than myself. And there was this little network outside of Nottingham that also created players that come in. And I can remember when I was an apprentice, Jimmy, as you know, always used to go to Malta for his holidays. And I can remember him ringing up my parents and saying, can you take a Maltese player for a week? We want to look at him. He's on trial. I mean, my mum said, what am I supposed to say, son? I can't turn him down, can he? I can't turn him down. So we used to take Maltese players who he brought over to actually give trials to see if they were of any real quality. And, you know, this is Jimmy's connection and character, and just wonderful, you know.
What a lovely little story. What a lovely little story. Paul, now as you're coming to the end of your quarantine, we now need to let you get on that exercise bike for the last time, get your last couple of sessions in. And I'm sure that the next 24 hours is going to be quite exciting for you to finally get out of that hotel room. It's been great to chat. Yeah. Thank you very much for making the contact to us, because that's what all this is about. It's sharing stories, players, coaches, with supporters. It's been a great trip down memory lane. Hopefully it's past 1 hour of the 14 days you've had to spend in what, from what I can see, amounts to solitary. Thank you very much indeed. All the very best in your career in Bangladesh. All Notts fans will be watching the FIFA rankings now for the Bangladeshis, and look forward to getting back with your family very, very soon.
Thanks, Paul. Been a pleasure. Look after yourself and keep up the good work. Yeah. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.